if you intend to configure a large number of computers for remote scripting, then signing your scripts is very important. What we mean when we say signing scripts is the application of digital signatures that ensure that a given script comes from trusted creators. You don't have to sign your scripts, but you should, and signatures are required when you set the execution policy either to remote signed, which means that if a script is being run that comes from a location other than the local machine, it needs to be signed, or all signed, which means if a script is being run, it has to be signed no matter where it came from. So the steps for this are first to create a certificate or buy a certificate from somebody and then install it. Once you've got that certificate available to you for code signing, you use the set authenticode signature commandlet to sign a script. Now, most people for code signing choose to self-sign. And what self-signing is the creation of a certificate manually in your environment that you then install where needed, and you set that up on your various machines as a trusted certificate. This is a pretty complicated operation. In fact, I think it's needlessly complicated. I pray someday Microsoft will realize their tools for signatures aren't very good and they'll do something about it. But in the meantime, I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, the steps I'm going to run through are all available in the PowerShell help under Get Help About Signing. You more or less need to follow the steps, certainly around the certificate creation, very closely to match what is in About Signing. And the reason for that is that the tools just don't leave much room for error. All right, so what we're going to do is move over to a set of machines that I have set up. One of them runs SharePoint Server, another one of them is a workflow machine, and then the third one is a domain controller. And I'm going to create a self-signed certificate and install it in a couple of locations, and then create a script and sign it. All right, so let's do that. Now, in order to make a certificate, the first thing I'm going to need is a utility that comes in a couple of forms, but the easiest way to get it is via the .NET SDK, and that is called MakeCert. MakeCert's going to be available to you on a machine if you've installed Visual Studio, any recent version of it, and if you haven't, then you can just download the .NET Framework SDK. So, like I said, there's just really not much wiggle room about how you go about the certificate creation process. Really, the only choices that you get to make are the password for the certificate and its actual name. So I'm going to start off by doing the get command, or rather the get help about signing, because this help topic has the exact syntax that I'm going to need for MakeCert inside of it. All right, so we're going to scroll up here, and what I'm looking for are the MakeCert commands. All right, here they are. So I'm just going to copy these over into Notepad and clean this up. Now, the most important part of this is this really cryptic EKU parameter, and that tells MakeCert what the certificate is going to be used for, and this particular set of mysterious magic numbers means I'm making a self-signed certificate. So let me, after I finish cleaning this up, I'll explain that the first line here is going to create a certificate in my trusted root certificates, and then the second one is going to copy the certificate into my local certificate store. Now, like I said, in order to run this, I need to be using the .NET Framework SDK. This machine happily has Visual Studio installed, and so if you have that, you're going to have access to the native tools command prompt. And really what this does is it sets the environment path up so that it has access to all these commands, and so I can actually just run MakeCert without any sort of path I can just use it wherever I happen to be. So I'm going to move out to the root directory. I could, of course, set the same path up inside of PowerShell, but we're just running a couple of commands here, so we'll go ahead and use this. I'll just copy these and then come over here and paste these in. And it's going to ask me for a password, and so I'll provide that. And then it's going to ask me for another password, and I'll provide that. And I'll choose OK. And it says succeeded, which means that the first operation completed. And now I need to give it the same password that I gave it before. And it says that this succeeded as well. So we can take a look at these certificates in Management Console. I'm just going to run MMC. And what we need to do here is add a snap-in. And the snap-in we want is certificates. And we'll just use the my user account here. And I'll also add in the computer account. I always add both in, usually, when I'm working with certificates. And if I look at the local user and go under personal, I can see that I've got the PowerShell user certificate, which is what corresponds to the second line. And under my trusted root certificates, I've got my PowerShell local certificate root, which is what I made with the first command. Now, in PowerShell, I can verify that I actually have a code signing certificate installed, as opposed to some other kind of, or some other certificate intended for some other use, by using getChildItem and searching in the certificate store. So this is a provider, so I can treat it just like a drive, and we're going to look for the current user, which is me, and then under my, and what we're looking for is code signing. Well, it would help if I actually used getChildItem. Let's try that again. All right, and we can see that I have this certificate with a thumbprint. If it's not a code signing certificate, then when I attempt to use it to set the Authenticode signature, what will happen is that it'll tell me that the certificate is not intended for code signing. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sign a script that I already have. So if I open up the file dialog here, I can see that I've got one called make registry key, and then another script. But the one I'm going to use here is make registry key.ps1. So let's open this, and you can see right now that it's just got one little operation inside of it. That's all we need to demonstrate the process. I'll go ahead and maximize this, make it a little easier to read. And what I'm going to say is that I want to set the Authenticode signature. So let's just set Authenticode signature. And what this needs is the path to the item we're looking for. And so this is under my documents, and it's called make registry key.ps1. And then we need the certificate. Now I only have one certificate in here. I could have caught getChildItem to get the certificate back, but I'm just going to put it right here inside this argument. So I'm going to say get childItem, and we're going to execute that same command that we did before. So this is going to be under the cert drive, and this is under current user, and then under my, and then we're looking for the code signing cert. And since it's possible for us to have more than one code signing cert, this is going to return an array. I know that there's exactly one there, and so what I'm going to do is grab the very first item in the array, and then I'm going to hit enter, and it just executes. All right, so if I close make registry key and open it back up again, you can see that set Authenticode signature has added this big old fat digital signature to the bottom of it. So to test and make sure I have everything working, I'm going to call set execution policy, and I'm going to change it to all signed. And this is going to give me a warning, and I'm going to say, yes, I really do mean to do this. And first, we're going to try to run the second script, the one I didn't sign. So this is under Documents, and this was called set SP list item property PS1. Right? So let's just try to run that, and you can see that I get an error telling me that it could not be loaded because it's not digitally signed. But if we try to run the make registry key, it's first going to tell me that it's published by a certificate that is not trusted on my system and ask me, do I want to trust it? And so I'm going to say, yeah, always run things that come from that publisher. And the script executes just fine. Okay, so now that I've got a certificate, I'm ready to configure remote scripting on some machines. Now, like I said before, I don't have to have a certificate to do remote scripting, but it's a best practice, and in my opinion, I do have to have it if I want anything to be safe, and I want to be able to trust that malicious scripts aren't being run on my network. So there are some requirements for remote scripting. The first is that PowerShell needs to be installed on each machine. And to execute anything through a remote session, I'm going to need to make sure that I'm working as a local admin on whatever remote machines I need to work on. Once these prerequisites are met, then on each machine I need to execute the enable PS remoting commandlet, which will install WinRM, set up the firewall, and do everything that's going to be necessary in order for me to be able to connect to the machine. Well, like I said, signed scripts are a best practice, so after I've done that, I'm going to take my certificate and install it. And then finally, I'm going to set the execution policy to be remote signed. And once I've done all of these things, then I'm ready to do some fun remote scripting. All right, let's take a look at that. So this SharePoint machine is on a network with a couple other machines. They all run Windows Server 2008 R2, but they were all built from an image that has the .NET Framework 4.0 installed, which is a prerequisite for PowerShell 3. All right, so what I'm going to do is configure the domain controller to allow remote scripting with a signed and trusted certificate. I'm just going to RDP into my domain controller box. And we'll open up PowerShell ICE over here. And now I'm going to enable PS remoting. And when I say this, it's going to tell me that it's going to do a number of things. So it's going to start or restart WinRM. It's going to set it to start automatically. It's going to create a listener on a port so that it can accept inbound requests, and it's going to create a firewall inbound rule exception for WS management traffic. All right, so I'm just going to say yes to all. And it's going to ask me, are you sure? And now we have a firewall exception enabled. Okay, so we're ready to connect to the machine. Now, like I said, I want to configure this with the certificate from the other machine. And there are a few ways that I could go about getting the certificate over there and installed, but what I'm going to do is use another utility called Cert Manager, which is also part of the .NET Framework SDK. And this is on, just to be clear, the SharePoint machine, and here's the certificate that I created previously. So I'm just going to export this. And I do want to export the private key. And we'll export all the extended properties. And I need to give it the password. And then I need to tell it where I want to store it. So we'll just go ahead and put this on my C drive. You can see I've done this once before. So we'll go ahead and replace that file. Choose Next, and then choose Finish, and it'll tell me the export was successful. All right, so I can close this at this point. And now what I'm going to do is take this file and copy it into my RDP session. And this is on the domain controller, and then I'll just right click this and choose install. Give it the password and let it install it. And now if I run Microsoft Management Console and add the certificate snap-in, and take a look at the personal certificates, there's the PowerShell user certificate. All right, so now this machine is going to recognize scripts that have this signature on it so that I can trust them. All right, and now the last thing that I want to do as a preparation to remote script on this machine is actually change the execution policy. So we'll set the execution policy and we're going to change it to remote signed. And it warns me security risk, blah, blah, blah. Of course, I know what I'm doing, so I choose yes. And now, before we try to run any remote scripts, let's talk about remote sessions. Remote sessions let us execute commands interactively on remote machines from our local machine as if we were sitting physically at the remote machine. But it's even better than that because we can run scripts that are on our local machine on the remote machines without having to actually copy the script. And furthermore, we can create persistent connections. So we can start a session, do some work, leave the session, go to another machine even if we want to, and then reconnect to that session later on to finish whatever it was we were doing. Creating and managing remote sessions is actually pretty easy. And there are a set of PowerShell commandlets that you can use to do that. So the easiest way to find these is to do a get command and then look for PS session to see all of them. But the key ones are enter PS session and exit PS session, right? So enter PS session connects, starts the session up. Exit PS session ends the session or disconnects from it. Then we have new PS session, which creates a persistent connection that we can connect to and disconnect from as necessary until we actually remove that session and kill it. And if we want to see what all sessions that we currently have running, we can use the get PS session commandlet. So let's start off by creating a non-persisted session with our domain controller. So this is done with the enter PS session command and the computer name. And if I've got everything set up right on the DC, then what I should see here in just a second is a prompt that has the computer name to tell me that I'm on the domain controller, and I can see that I'm in C users administrator documents, whereas on my local machine I was on C users administrators SP 2013 documents. Alright, so we can execute commands just as if we were there on that machine, and I have no documents in my documents folder. I could go out to the root, or rather to the root, and do the same command, and I would see that I have perf logs, program files, users windows, and that PowerShell certificate that I just copied. And we can see easily enough, if I look at the root of the C drive on my local machine, it's got a lot more stuff in it, and this proves that we are actually looking at the root of C over here on the domain controller. I can end this session just by going exit PS session. And when I do this, it just tears the session down because it's not persistent. I can see that there are no sessions currently by using the get PS session commandlet, and it doesn't return anything. All right, so if I want to create a persistent connection, what I need to do is start with the new PS session commandlet, and of course I give it the name of the machine that I'm looking to work with, and it returns the information that I need in order to now enter that session. So the main thing I need is its ID. So now I can use the enter session commandlet again. At this time I'm going to give it the ID, which is 2. And we can see the prompt changes to tell me that I'm at the domain controller. And this time, if I exit the PS session and run the get PS session commandlet again, you can see that that session is still there and it is still opened. And that means that I could enter into it again if I want to. When I'm done, what I need to do to get rid of it is actually do an end. Oh, I exited it. All right, so let's enter in the session again. And this time we'll end the PS session. I'm not sure why IntelliSense isn't popping up. Of course, the reason it's not popping up is because I'm typing in the wrong thing, right? Of course, if we want to get rid of something that we created earlier with new, it's not end, it's remove. You know, you would think by now, after all this time of using ACE3, that I would realize if the IntelliSense wasn't showing me what I expected to see, that it would be my fault and not PowerShell's. But I need to give it the ID at the very least, and so let's exit out of here. And let's see if we have any PS sessions running. We still do, right? That's a little peculiar the way that works. I say give it ID 2 now. It's gone. All right, so in spite of my fumbling and bumbling there with the end PS session, it's actually remove PS session, and at this point you should understand how to create a non-persistent connection just by using enter versus a persistent connection by using new and then enter. Now, being able to work interactively is all well and good, but what we really want to be able to do is run scripts. Now, the enter PS session and new PS session commandlets can also take the name of several computers. And so if we're going to connect to a dozen machines all at once, interactively just isn't going to get it. We need to be able to invoke commands across all of those sessions, and that's what the invoke commandlet is all about. And invoke command can be used to execute commands locally or remotely, but typically the only time you're going to use it to invoke locally is when you're testing. What's great about invoke command is that it runs the script on the local machine, on the remote machine, and it doesn't require you to copy anything. And of course, in order for it to be fully useful, you can pass arguments and retrieve results to the scripts between the machines. All right, so let's use invoke command now to run some remote scripts on our domain controller from our SharePoint machine. All right, so let's start off by using invoke command without any session at all. So you can use invoke command kind of as a one-time operation to do something on a remote machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say invoke command, and I'm going to give it the computer name, and the computer name, of course, is DC. And we need to tell it what we actually want to invoke, and that's done through a script block. And so in this case, we're going to do something really simple. We're just going to get the processes that are running on the domain controller. And so when I hit enter and run this, you can see that there's lots of stuff going on the domain controller, and we know that it's all the domain controller because the PS computer name that we got back says DC, as opposed to SharePoint, which is the name of the machine that we're on. All right, so let's go ahead and create a new PS session over to the domain controller, and then we'll enter that session, giving it the ID, which this time is going to be 4. So now I'm working interactively, but really I don't want to be working interactively because I could be invoking commands on lots of different machines. So this isn't any good. So I've got the session created, but instead of entering it, what I really want to do is just use it. So we'll exit this PS session knowing that it's still there, right? So we say get PS session, right? It's still there because we used new as opposed to just enter. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to So I'm not sure what happened here. I must have hit some weird combination of keystrokes. So we'll just say never run there. When IntelliSense was trying to do something, I guess I managed to get ICE to try to run a script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set s equal to get the PS session. And we need the ID, right, which we got above there. And the ID is 4. All right, so now we have the session in a variable. And I can say I want to invoke a command. And I need this time to give it the session as instead of the computer name. And so we're going to give it the session, which is in S. And then I need to tell it the file path to the script that I actually want it to run. And so this is going to be in our documents folder, and it's going to be a script that I signed earlier, which was called makeregistryKey.ps1. So I try to run this, and it just it runs immediately. It tells me that the computer name is DC. So what this did was it created a registry property named foo with the value of bar that was part of the console item under HKeyCurrentUser. And if we go over to the domain controller, which is where we are right now, and we set our location to HKeyCurrentUser console. Once again, if IntelliSense isn't working, it must be that I'm stupid. There we go. All right, and if we take a look at the child item properties, or rather get the child item above there, which is going to give us console. And we should see foo right there at the bottom. Right, so we've just kind of scratched the surface here, but armed with your knowledge now, you are ready to begin, manipulating thousands of machines from the comfort of your desktop. The last big concept I want to cover here is jobs. And a job is basically anything that we want to do where we want to do the work in the background, maybe because it's going to take a long time to run, or maybe because we don't need to wait for the operation to complete before we do the next operation and we want to do things asynchronously. So once we start a job, we need the ability, of course, to check its status, and PowerShell has commandlets for that. And we need to be able to retrieve the job results after the status tells us that it's done. And we can run jobs locally and remotely, and the way we run them remotely as well is to use the invoke command commandlet using the asJob switch. All right. So what I'm going to do now is go back over to the SharePoint machine, and we'll do something that's kind of a long-running operation, which is the backing up of a site collection. The commandlet we use to start a job is unsurprisingly called start job. And to start a job, we're almost always going to want to catch the job itself in a variable. So I'm going to create a variable called job, and it's going to be equal to start, not sturt, I'm from Georgia, start job. We're going to start a job, and it takes as its argument at least a script block. And so for this job, what we're going to do is use the SharePoint backup spsite commandlet. And this takes an identity, which is the URL to the site that we're trying to back up, and in this case the one we're backing up is called SharePoint. And then we need to give it the path of where we want the output file to go. So we'll say that this is going to go to c:/backup.back. All right. And I just run this, and it returns pretty quickly. Now, if I take a look at job, I need to be fast about this. We can see that the job failed. So I did something wrong. Well, let's see what actually happened. We're going to receive the job's results, right? So to receive the job's results, we just need to give it the job that we're executing. And isn't this interesting that I'm getting this error that backup site is not recognized as the name of a commandlet function script file? Now the reason for this is that often the job runs in its very own PowerShell session. And although I have loaded the module for SharePoint in this session, I have not got it in the jobs session, right? So I need to change my my script a little bit here. So let's get back up here to the script block, and before we run backup SP site, I need to actually make sure that that commandlet is loaded by importing its module. Now, SharePoint doesn't use a module, it uses a PowerShell snap-in. So this is brought in with the add PS PowerShell snap-in commandlet. The snap-in you need depends, of course, on the operation that you're going to run. In this case, what we want is Microsoft SharePoint PowerShell. Alright, so now our script block has got two things going on. And of course these could be scripts, these could be commandlets, really anything that we want inside the script block will go. And let's execute this again. And now let's check the job. And we can see that it's running. And if I come over to my C drive, here in a little bit, hopefully a backup file is going to appear. Well, it's taken a little longer than I thought, so let's see what's going on here. Well, it's still running. All right, so I'm just going to be patient. Wait a second. Now, if this was a real scenario where I was doing something complicated, then I would be in a loop at this point, or I would be waiting for the job to finish, or maybe I would do a bunch of other things and then come back at the end and see what the statuses were. But I can see that it's now completed. And there is our backup.back file. And that's how you do a job.